So I guess without further ado, let's welcome our guest to the stage, the director and co-writer of the film, Noah Baumbach, and the co-writer and the star of the film, Greta Gerwig. Hello. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank
you. Of course. This film is so wonderful, and I remember being at the festival and actually seeing it twice. It just really knocked me out. And these festivals are intense experiences where you're supposed to see film after film. I couldn't get it out of my head. And I talked to my colleague about it at the magazine, and he put it in a really interesting way that I wanted to put to you both. It's a college comedy, I think you could say, a college drama maybe, and it's about people who are so concerned about what they are about to become that they forget to be who they are. Is that a reduction?
Yeah, that's
or
nice.
That should have been on the poster.
That should have been on the poster?
Yeah.
I wonder if that tension is something that you were consciously going for, or where the spirit of the film came from.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, I think, and Brooke in some ways represents for Tracy some sort of someone who seems to have kind of figured out how to kind of game life in some way, and you know, in Brooke's kind of way of maybe trying to kind of get places without actually doing the work to get there, you know, is maybe kind of appealing, you know, at a young age, because it, you know, it all feels so overwhelming, you know, and but obviously it has its limitations that she kind of discovers.
Yeah, no, that's right. We always talk about the gap between who you perceive yourself to be and who you actually are, and that's another version of like not being where you are.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I feel like that theme runs through many of your films. The idea of maturity or being dragged kicking and screaming to a place where maybe you're not prepared for or where you want to be.
Yeah, I feel like I have to gather like coherent ways of saying it like your colleague did, so I can, you know, more adequately answer the, you know, but you know, I start to steal them from other people as they say it, and then I say, well, really what it's about is, you know,
there you go.
But yeah, I guess that it seems to be that I'm, you know, interested in some way, I guess, in sort of dramatizing, you know, I think what is sort of essentially a kind of, you know, internal, I mean, sort of for human beings in the real world, I think it's a more kind of internal struggle, or, you know, or whatever, and you know, I'm sort of looking for ways to kind of externalize and dramatize, you know, kind of psychological and emotional states of mind.
And that's hard because it usually takes place over many years and lots of thinking and time, and you have 90 minutes in which to string those pearls along a narrative.
And I have trouble reaching 90 minutes even. It's like 84 minutes, 86 minutes.
That's just right. Please, that's the sweet spot. I understand, Greta, that you went to Columbia.
Oh yeah, I went to Barnard.
Barnard.
Yeah.
And this film is set there, and you know, so I'm curious as to how much of this is derived from your experiences there.
There's a good portion of, I mean, I never had a Brooke in my life. I never actually had that experience. But I mean, in some ways, I feel like one thing I learned from Noah in collaborating with him when we were writing and making Francis Ha, and when he was directing it, this feeling of if you're deciding between shooting a place that means nothing to you and shooting a place that means something to you, like always pick the place that means something to you, because the way that you'll do it will feel different than if you don't care about that place at all. So instead of having it be like any college, you know, or NYU, which I didn't go to, you know, that it was actually at Barnard. And we actually shot on the hall where I lived when I was a freshman, and yeah, I mean, I had a club that you found out if you got in by a pie in your face. Like that's true.
And this is your first screenwriting credit? No.
No, Francis.
No, Francis.
Francis was it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, Francis, and then this. Yeah. Yeah.
And Frances went to Vassar, which was my alma mater, so
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
we had to
Change it up.
We had to change it up.
We had to change up our 7 sisters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. You know what? We actually have a few clips that I'd love to show everyone. Let's roll the first one,
Okay.
and we can talk about that.
Great.
It's a really fun scene. The
Clips have gotten so much longer. If you,
I know, they're right.
And I feel like when I was a kid, you got like 4 lines or something. Now you get like a whole scene.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to
Yeah.
get the flavor of that. I love it. I'm now noticing that just in that one scene alone, Brooke talks about how close they are in age, and then also she calls her Squirt. So it's like she's a little kind of psychotic. Actually, age seems to me to be really crucial to the character.
Yeah.
Like there's a point where everything is in front of you and everything is exciting, and then there's a point where maybe you've reached it and there's more behind you.
Yeah. Well, I think Brooke is one of those people who always defined herself by being like the youngest person in the room in a way. Like I think she probably moved to New York when she was 17. She didn't go to college, and she was probably like the young one for so long that it was really difficult to let go of that identity. And I think she likes to make Tracy feel, or she likes to talk down to Tracy in some ways, but just because she's cooler, not because she's older.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's the idea she has in her head about what she's doing. But yeah, she's, I mean, New York, everywhere. It's so, there is a feeling of like not being relevant, or like all these things stop being, like, how are you gonna, if everybody, like, there's all these lists all the time, like the top 25 people under 25, and you're like, well, I'm never going to be on that list again. But nobody's like, the top 60 people under 60. That never happens.
We'll do that list.
Maybe it does. Yeah. But I guess you just have to.
Just the top 60
yeah,
people.
Yeah. But anyway, it's a definite, she's preoccupied with it.
It's also, I guess, about money in that way too, of sort of how long can you get by before you actually can't survive in the city.
Right. Just up to this point, all she's concerned about is almost like cultivating a protege, and it's almost for her own like happiness that she has this sort of sidekick. But she would never be the sidekick.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Tracy's the sidekick.
Tracy's the sidekick.
And also, I have to just say, how amazing is it to have a psychic in a New York film? There is this tradition of Broadway Danny Rose and New York movies that have scenes with psychics. So I'm not mistaken here, right?
Yeah, and we wanted to both, acknowledge that, sort of tip our hat to that, but also take it seriously. Like he's actually psychic.
I mean, he is actually also a psychic.
He is also a psychic.
That man.
That man who acted as a psychic.
That man
is a psychic.
Okay. Oh.
For real.
For reals.
Yeah.
And he was
but
also
he
like,
said the lines we gave him. He was very
he was
patient.
sort of like, I would never say this.
But he was mistaken. Because he did say it.
Because he did say it. Yeah. But he was very game. He was very.
He's good.
Super good.
He's good.
Yeah.
To get him to do box office predictions for you.
Yeah.
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 Does the
I see a rollout, a
right,
specialty
exactly,
market
a specialty
rollout.
market.
Yeah. I see you
Me
opening
too.
in 4 theaters on the first weekend.
Yeah. Winning the per screen and
Yes.
then having trouble crossing over
No.
later.
Does the idea of going on a quest, like that's basically, this is the moment when she sets out to confront something from her past and going, I mean, do you, in terms of your own screenwriting, and you collaborated on this, was that important? How traditional are you, would you say, as screenwriters? Like
Pretty
structural.
What counts as traditional?
Oh, you know
The
what?
hero's quest.
I feel like I can.
What's that?
The quest of the.
I feel like I can answer that. Or I feel like yes.
I'm glad you can. Yeah.
Because I feel like when we started, the first thing we wrote together was Frances Ha, and I felt like I was early on when we were writing it. I felt like there was a moment where I was more in the mindset of like it could be like a book of short stories, like that it could be kind of more disconnected in that way. And I remember you were like, no, it needs to have, like, you were like, let's build a structure that works. So it's like a lot of it's a lot of writing without a particular direction to get material, but then we do really put in tracks underneath.
There has
afterwards.
to be a spine. That,
Yes.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just, well, a character study, but that comes through anyway.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you start out, you have ideas that a lot of your favorite movies actually have no real structure, and then, like, I remember, like, my first attempts at writing things, I was sort of not thinking about that, and then, the more you do it, the more you appreciate sort of what you need to do to tell a story in this amount of time, this 82 minutes or whatever you're going to do it in.
Those are the real belated discoveries, right? The structure, because they're so, when they're done well, they're really hidden expertly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you start looking back at these movies that, like you're saying, that you thought didn't have structure, and they all do, and they've got, like, it's just deftly hidden.
Sure.
And
I mean, they need to be there because that's how the movies communicate in a way. Like,
Right.
people expect to be taken somewhere.
Yeah.
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 Why don't we roll another clip?
Okay.
Why don't we do this? I think that Brooke expected that moment to be a little shorter.
Yeah.
Right.
She has all the energy, but she doesn't
Yeah.
have the pacing right. In a way, that's kind of like the whole
Yeah.
film.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that was like a direction written into the script.
Really?
That, like, Brooke she begins a gesture that she realizes halfway through is too short to do the whole stairs, so then she has to, like, start over again.
But you're right, sort of deciding how many times you cut to Tracy is, part of, part of the way of structuring
It's so well edited, and just the way they're trying to maintain that emotion on their face, and there's oh, now you're here, okay.
Yeah.
And it does lead to maybe a technical question. How long do you devote to the editing process? Like, there's the writing and the directing, but how absorbed do you get in editing?
I mean, completely. It's. I mean, I don't know in terms of, like, how much actual time it is. I mean, there's always some schedule, but you kind of work on it till you're ready. And when I started out, I remember sort of being told that the way you work with an editor is they assemble it, and then you watch their assembly, and then you kind of go back in and kind of fix it. And I did that on my first movie, and I hated it because it just feels like you're trying to fix something broken from the beginning.
Right. It's like wasted time.
Yeah, and I think that was a holdover, obviously, from the old studio system where directors didn't often cut their movies, and things they were already. Raoul Walsh was just grabbing the next script and moving on, and so I build them with the editor, so we start from the beginning and we start putting the whole movie together, which takes more time, at least initially, but it by the time we get to the end, we're actually pretty close to having a cut because we've been kind of going over and over and over it.
I can't help but mention this too. You're having an amazing year. You're on fire, and your last film, While We're Young, which was just from the spring, is actually about an editor or a filmmaker.
Right.
And you have another film coming up in the fall, a documentary. Is this pace of work, this pace of filmmaking, something that you plan, or is it something a new vibe that you're feeling?
I mean, I didn't spend any less amount of time on any of these movies. They all actually took quite some time to finish. It's just the way they kind of got backed up, I guess, in terms of, like, the shoots ran into each other, which is usually not the case. Like, we shot Mistress America. We knew we had a window that wasn't quite big enough, but we wanted to kind of take advantage of sort of, we had a script we were excited about, and Greta had a window, and we kind of shot it and cut. I kind of got it cut to a pretty good point, but then I was waiting for Ben to finish Walter Mitty, then we started While We're Young, and we made that all the way to the end, and then I went back and finished Mistress America. So they sort of ran into each other in the assembly line, but it actually isn't that. I mean, the amount of time to make all of these things is the same. But I think there's a kind of nice, from Frances through Mistress, I think, they were all shot fairly rapid I mean, I guess, you know, in terms of when I finish one thing, I went right into the other thing. And so that was, you know, I think some energy comes with that, I guess.
There's also something about the New Yorkiness of this clip and just this story in general. And I wonder if, maybe Greta, you could reflect on this. I wonder if these themes we've been talking about that undergird this story, do you think they're intrinsically New York anxieties? The idea of hoping to become something, or when is it finally going to happen for me? When is the shoe drop going to happen for me?
I mean, I don't know that it's intrinsically New York. I think there's, you know, the sort of celebration of youth is present everywhere. But right. I do think that there's I mean, I can't speak to all anxieties, all places. But I do think that there's, what's different, I think, is that when I talk to my friends who live in other cities, there's a feeling with like New York or LA or Chicago or San Francisco, or, you know, that there's a feeling of hanging on to some dream, some idea. Whereas I feel like I'm from Sacramento, and I love Sacramento, but I always say in its heart, and I love these kinds of cities. Like I always describe it, it's a sort of low confidence city in a certain way. Like, you know, like Nashville, high confidence city. Knoxville, low confidence city. Like it's just, it is awesome, but it doesn't think it's awesome, which makes it more awesome.
More awesome.
But it doesn't have like, I'm awesome, like city that's so super cool and all the cool people should come here. It's just quietly awesome. I'm trying to thread this needle because I love it so much, and I don't want to. But
you just slam Knoxville.
No, I love Knoxville.
And that's
and it has
on a
like
podcast.
I know what you mean, though. It
can be downloaded by everyone in
No,
Knoxville.
I know. No, I'm saying that it's not like.
They get iTunes in Knoxville.
Oh no, this is like
my
fear. This is my fear of saying. But there is. I love places that are unassuming in a certain way. Like that they like don't think that they're, anyway. My point is, I think that there's more. I feel like there's more of like a sense of like in New York, it's appropriate to hang on to your dream until you're in your 50s or 60s in a way that maybe doesn't feel quite as appropriate other places, because like there aren't as many people doing that. They're just living their real lives as they're going. And here I do think there is a sustaining of the dream.
Right.
But I mean, you think about all like, you know, specific New York stories, the best of them are obviously universal, because, you know, it doesn't mean that New York's not essential to them. It's just that, you know, you're telling them, you know, the anthropology is so right that everyone identifies with it.
Sure.
Even in Knoxville. No,
I love Knoxville.
I think it's more to the idea that there's so much is presented as an opportunity here. Like, yeah, I'll open a restaurant, or I'll do this shop, or I'll Soul Cycle, or I'll, you know, like there's all the things that Brooke does.
Well, the Brooke character, yeah, I mean, it's like
and she can't commit.
Yeah.
And her kind of romance of herself and her idea of who, you know, it's so there's so much persona that New York is sort of the right place for her to be in her own movie, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So let me ask you, this is not a personal question, kind of personal, but hopefully not a prying question. How have things changed between you work-wise from Frances Ha to this film? In terms of the way you communicate on set, or the way you create together?
I mean, in a lot of ways, to me, I don't know, it might feel different. It feels very similar to me. I mean, the reason we wanted to make another one was because we liked making it so much. So I think, and that remains in this one. And it's just, it's just really fun. I mean, it's really fun. We really like to. I mean, I guess what's different? I don't know.
No, I think that's true.
Yeah,
I think it feels essentially the same. In a good way.
I never understood. I've asked that question to a lot of actors who have worked with directors many times, and it's like, you expect them to say, oh, we have this great shorthand now, but it's almost like people don't want to do shorthand. They want to communicate, really, and they want to talk through the process and the character and the acting and the moment. Is that what you thought?
Yeah, and each one is its own thing. So it's like...
And it has its own bumps.
Yeah, and its own sort of, you know, and I think both Greta and I work kind of interpretively on set, even though we've created this, you know, we wrote the script, and that's true of things I've written myself too. I think I kind of approach them just intuitively as an interpretive director, as if I didn't know why it was there to, you know, I hadn't like struggled with the logic of every scene and every line up until then. And I think, I know Greta does that as an actor. She's sort of comes at it, you know, like, I mean, in a kind of, for me, it's kind of incredibly impressive to see like how she kind of finds the language as if she's, you know, just discovering it, which is what you want every actor to do to some degree. But she knows it, you know, better than anybody. So, you know, I think that's, you know, I think we're kind of, you know, that comes naturally to both of us.
That's hard to do, and it's hard to sustain on a set.
I think it's not hard if it's not hard, you know. But you know, but I mean, you know, but it doesn't mean it's not all hard. It's just that that kind of split is kind of natural, and I think for most writer directors and writer actors too, I think it has to be, because I think you can't, you know, if it's something you're kind of drawn to do, you can't know it all. You have to be in sort of a constant mode of openness and discovery, you know, when you're making it.
Why don't we run our final clip, and we'll get to some questions. I was watching an interview, Greta, that you did with Sarah Polley on the disc with Francis Ha on the Criterion disc. And she said something that I felt as well about that movie, which was that she was, you know, she was thrilled by how effervescent it was and how euphoric she felt watching the flow of the movie, but also this kind of loneliness that creeps up on you watching you perform and watching that character. And I have to say, I watched Mistress America, and I had the same, I was smiling throughout this film and also feeling like I was almost about to cry. Like, it's so, she can be so separate, even in a scene like that where she's lunging for something that she gave up, you know, and is now past for her. Yeah. That kind of, do you start with the loneliness, or do you?
I think, I mean, in some ways I feel like I like things that sparkle on the surface and are sad underneath. Like, I mean, I think so many of the movies that I love have that energy and that feeling and that, and even, I mean, this is like the most repeated, this is, I mean, everyone knows this ending, but like at the end of Annie Hall, when he's like, it was just so great to see her, and they kind of go their own way, and like that feeling of like, oh, like,
what could have been?
Yeah, I mean, but the loneliness, I mean, I guess I am just interested in people who, I mean, Brooke in particular, because she is always acting and she's always putting on a show, so any moment where she drops that is almost, I find kind of instantly heartbreaking, because it costs her so much to keep the show going that if she's closing it for a second, it means that something's really going wrong. And I don't know, I guess I am interested in people alone and moments of, I mean, I've always loved in anything that have like these, I like plots that work and stay on the track and tell a story, but I also like these tendrils that don't quite ever go back in the box, and they just sort of stay out there. Like, I don't know about that. That's just something that happened. Like, I mean, in this movie with Tracy, she steals a few things, like little objects. Nobody ever brings it up. It never happens. Like, it never becomes a thing. It's just a little thing we know about. It's like the secret you have with the audience that only the audience knows and that the world around you doesn't know or something. And I find those things really moving.
Yeah. They're small little, we observe the moments, but they just happen without the characters knowing. I love that about it. You recently presented Jonathan Demme's Something Wild to a crowd, which I think also speaks to that. And this scene in general, if you haven't seen Mistress America, takes place outside of the city. That's another outside of the city movie like Something Wild is as well. And it's a beautiful slapstick sequence that lasts like 20, 30 minutes, the whole ending of the movie. Is that where, I mean, is that in a way kind of where you started, or this idea of maintaining this masterful sequence like that? Or actually, let's start from the start. That trope of leaving the city or what's outside the city, is that something that interests you maybe as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I did it without showing the city in some ways in both Margot at the Wedding and Greenberg too, that they're kind of characters that are in out of their environment, their sort of comfort zone, and in both cases too, I was shooting outside New York and shooting in cities I knew, in the country in Margot and the city in LA that I sort of felt less like home to me. So they also, that's kind of puts you in a kind of different creative space as well. Yeah, and with this one, you know, thinking of movies like Something Wild or even Broadway Danny Rose, as you mentioned, they go outside.
Or Tootsie is a film we've talked about.
Yeah, Tootsie, they go to the country. And, you know, I think that is something, you know, it was kind of baked in some ways to the story we had of you know, being Brooke kind of taking, it's like either you're being absconded or rescued. It's hard to know what, but you're being taken out of your kind of comfort zone and brought into another world. And initially it's kind of another New York, but then they're both kind of removed from their comfort zone. And I think it also kind of, you know, dramatically it's always interesting because we're all kind of different when we're in these, you know, other environments, you know, and suddenly, you know, it's like how we are when we all go stay with our family, or how we all are, you know, when, you know, a weekend away. I mean, these are all sort of tropes of interesting kind of more humorous stories, and you know, and it kind of felt right to us. I don't know, you know, what was kind of interesting about the creation of this, I think more so than Francis and more so for me in some of my other scripts, is that I think we really didn't quite know where we were going a lot of the time, and we kind of had to, you know, like actually hit points in the story where we didn't know what happened next. You know, and
even with the script.
Oh, well,
no, I'm saying while we were writing.
While we were writing. I mean,
when we shot it, we knew everything.
We wrote like 6 different versions of what exactly happens in Connecticut. I mean, in a way, it's like, or this is like, we would, I mean, we'd talk about movies that were influences, and you know, we'd talk about the movies you mentioned, or we talked about like Shampoo and the way he wanted to get that salon and the whole, you know, and them going to the different parties. But then we would also bring in, like, I had a story from my life where I ended up at somebody's fancy Hamptons house while that family was in the middle of a literal meltdown. And I didn't, you know, my friend wanted to hook up with some guy that they knew, and we were there, and I was like, I have no reason to be here. Why am I in this house? But I felt like that it's like we take these things, and it's like we didn't literally use that from my life, but that feeling of like, how did you end up in this house while this family is like in crisis? And you're just like, can I eat that salmon? Or no, I'll just stand in the, I'm sorry.
I'll stay in the background here while you guys work in this crisis.
I'm sorry, when's the train? Or can we walk that? No, okay. Like it's yeah. And then we combine it with like what movies are, you know?
How, is there a line maybe that you both are wary of crossing in terms of borrowing from your own life together and then using that for film, for scripts? No, there's no line.
Not
hopefully.
Our life together, though.
Or anything.
I don't know. I think, you know, I think you know when I think in early stages of writing too, you kind of want to be open to everything. And you know on some level by the time it's all molded and shaped and poured over and rewritten and cast and shot and edited, that these things so transform along the way that, and you really kind of lose track yourself of where any of this came from.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about the salmon story until now, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean I lose track of where
detail.
things came from, and then sometimes I'll get a angry phone call. It's like,
Why
I
is
can't
that
believe you used that. And then I'm like, oh, I didn't even remember. I write, yes, but it gets so absorbed into the fiction that you don't totally. I mean, I'm less sure of the. I mean, I feel less. I have more qualms about. I don't know the ethics of writing about other people, but you only ever live life with other people. So there's absolutely no way to write anything without including other people. That's the whole deal. I don't.
You're just more honest about it.
What do you mean?
About talking about it than I am.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Oh,
But it's also the theme of
the
While We're
movie.
Young and
Yeah.
this
And-
movie
yeah,
as well.
right.
This
Yeah.
idea of the ethics, I guess, of representation. Like how far do you go without feeling like you're betraying someone, or
Yeah.
maybe you're just turning something into art and making
Yeah.
it fun, making it dazzling.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but I think there's a sort of even essentially that sort of thing of what we take from, even taking the creative process out of it, what we take from each other and use from each other, and that there's something, just interpersonally that's interesting that maybe kind of takes on, more weight and drama when it's like a, something public and something, so it sort of makes its way in, into our stories in these sort of more dramatic ways, but I think is kind of relatable even in a non-creative process way.
Mm-hmm. Trust, and it's always something that gets negotiated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Why don't we take some questions? And I know we have some here.
Hi, I was wondering what made you decide to focus so much in your work about late adolescence in this period of becoming?
You mean in this movie particularly? Or
In this movie, and Frances Ha, I guess, in Kicking and Screaming as well?
Well, I guess one way of thinking of it is sort of late adolescence, but I think it's also even appropriate to the ages that these people are too. I mean, I think, in Kicking and Screaming, they're all highly articulate and mature in certain ways. They're just, in some ways, that's part of their problem, and that they've kind of talked themselves out of any, any kind of action. But, I think, these sort of periods of transition and moving on and letting go, I mean, things we've been talking about of sort of what do you take with you, what do you leave behind, who stays, who goes, who keeps you, who doesn't, these are things you face throughout your life at all these different stages, and these are kind of, in Frances and Mistress America, these are sort of, maybe, they're more in the characters are in their 20s, so it's sort of focused in that, at that time. But While We're Young, the movie I made before this, it's people in their 40s kind of dealing with not dissimilar, and so I feel like these things kind of don't go away, these kind of questions.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still like waiting for the day that like I wake up and I'm like, oh good, I'm me now. No more anxiety about what's like how I'm gonna become what I'm trying to be. Like I feel like on any given day there's always some letting go and coming into, and I think it happens forever as far as I can tell. I don't think you ever stop doing that. When I look at my parents or like my older brother and sister, like they're always in another phase of like, it's like the moment you realize when you get older, like that, oh, your parents didn't know what they were doing. They were just people who had a kid.
Yeah.
And that you will also be a person who does not know what they're doing because nobody knows what they're doing.
And we put a narrative to it,
Yeah,
and it seems
yeah,
so sensible,
yeah.
but they didn't know.
They didn't
Right.
know.
And you've got,
Yeah.
you just announced you're going to be directing a film, so
Yep.
it seems like you're embracing that.
Which part? Not knowing what
Yes.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think
And that movie's about actual adolescence.
yeah, that movie's about, as you guys, yes.
That's even better. Hi.
Hi.
Was there anything that you had to cut out that you really didn't want to cut?
Not that we shot, but we did have an idea for a dance sequence.
Yeah.
That was going to take place at the house that they all end up in the second half. And we really liked that idea. We had a choreographer that we loved that we were going to work with,
So
and she was
good.
going to play a pregnant lady, and she was going to
dance.
we had a whole. I mean,
couldn't write
there's
into
a
it.
sequence with the pregnant lady book club. That's why she was going to play
Yeah.
it. For people who haven't seen it, but yeah, but that never. The movie kind of, the speed and pace of the movie just couldn't slow down for that, or at least I wasn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out how to do it.
We
Somebody
couldn't figure
else
out how
might have
to
been
write into it and write out of it in a way
yeah,
that
and
was
so
normal.
I think ideally we would have found a way that the story could have somehow developed in the dance, but we
It's so
couldn't
hard to
it.
do. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, it's hard for
Just
Godard
do
to
it.
do, and it's hard for Hal Hartley to do.
Yeah,
There is one line that I know that basically what you see on the screen is almost exactly what the script is. It cuts very close to what our script was, but there is a line that Brooke, my character, she's very into self-promotion, but she's not great at it. Like, she's kind of ham-fisted with it, and she's not. It's like she doesn't have any slickness around it. It's all like, oh, you go on Twitter to like promote what you're doing, and that's what it's for. So you just say, hey everyone, I'm doing this awesome thing. But she doesn't see that you're supposed to sort of like
Finesse it a little.
finesse it, and she doesn't. Anyway, but there was a line that got cut out that I was like thought was really funny. Tracy and Brooke are at a bar, and she shows her. She says, "Oh, Nate just dropped a gram on Instagram. That means a picture." And anyway, I was like that line, and we had to cut it out because it was.
Did we cut it?
We
guess
cut
we
it.
did, yeah.
Nate just dropped a gram on Instagram. That means a picture is gone. So
That's funny.
she's always over-explaining it.
She's earnest, but that's,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Well, I find it so much more endearing when someone's like can't quite sell it. It's
But no, she knows enough to know she should be doing it.
yeah, like she's a person who would like talk about networking in the early '90s. You
Right.
know.
No one knew what that meant either, but we use that word a
Yeah.
lot.
Or, like,
She'd be
that party-
talking. She'd be
yeah.
talking about mindfulness now. You
Yeah.
know, I think if she was. Yeah.
Yeah, probably in LA doing that.
Yeah.
Do we have a final question?
Hi. How much of a role do you guys play in the music selection in your films? Specifically in Frances Ha, I really love the soundtrack, and I was curious to know your involvement in that.
I mean, it all comes from us.
Yeah.
You know, or I mean, and from me when I'm cutting them, and you know, and sometimes things are in the script, but often, you know, you find things later too. You know, like a movie has a kind of rhythm and sound that you sort of start to feel. You know, sometimes you feel it later. You know, or and you know, Frances had a kind of putting in these sort of older French New Wave score cues kind of brought some other kind of element to it that we didn't necessarily know, I think, when we were shooting the movie. It was something I just laid in to kind of, and it kind of brought this elegance and grandeur to the story, and which was, you know, I thought kind of beautiful and kind of honored the character in a kind of bigger way. And with this, it was, I don't know, we always kind of, even though it takes place now, we always sort of in our heads kind of connected it to movies we like from the 80s and like Something Wild, and so the kind of New Order OMD sound was something we were listening to a lot, and the composers Dean Wareham and Britta Phillips kind of we worked on a score with them that kind of has some of these elements and maybe sort of reminiscent of some of those, you know, John Hughes cues even, but you know, it's very much their own thing too. And so both movies have a song by Hot Chocolate too. Everyone's a Winner right. is the Paris sequence in Frances Ha, and Could Have Been a Lady is in the Welcome to the Great White Way, and then comes back. It's actually, and then it's at the end credits as well.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there'll be a thing where, like, if there's we have a great music supervisor as well. Yeah,
George Drakoulias
has
been with me since for most of my movies. Is just a great sort of friend, and also just has you know, great ideas and things, and
sometimes, like, if we can't get, like, Jen and Noah, while they're cutting the movie, will use a song, and then if for whatever reason we can't get like rights to it, they'll be like, let's try. Here are 5 other songs that are kind of either by the same people, or like we can maybe get or access to.
Yeah, there's always, I find on every movie there's always some song that you wouldn't actually think that some rights, you know, like there's like, you know, some piece of the rights are now owned by some asshole and living somewhere, you know, and they don't, and they want a lot of money for it. Yeah,
they're always like, they're skiing. We can't get them. They're in the Alps, and you're like, who are these people who buy song rights and like go ski?
Then go skiing.
Yeah, it's like
lives?
It's like buying taxi cab medallions in the movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that line always makes me laugh.
But you know, so there's no telling. In some ways, it's like the songs you think would be harder to get because they're more famous are like easier because they're in control of their own music and are kind of, you know, open and generous about, you know, the movies you know, letting you use it for not so much money.
The hardest are like hip hop music where they'll sample a bunch of stuff because the rights are so complicated because they've sampled things, and then like, so you need so many people's permission. This is something I only recently learned about, but music rights.
It can get complex.
We could do a whole podcast on music rights.
I recently I had the opportunity to talk to Diablo Cody about Ricky and the Flash, and she told me that, you know, never assume that the director's going to take your musical taste. Don't put a song actually in the script itself. That's a cardinal rule that she's then admitted to breaking all the time, and she's been very lucky. So I do have to ask, I love the way you use David Bowie's Modern Love in Frances Ha. That's not a song that you thought of when you were writing it? It's just something that happened in the editing bay?
Well, of course, in the script, it says Frances runs down the street. She was dancing maybe a little bit, and I mean it's a couple sentences, and so it would probably, if you were reading the script, it would be easy to miss that as a kind of moment. But we always saw it as a moment, you know, a big moment in the movie, and.
I mean, I know it wasn't when we were actually shooting the running. We shot it like 4 different times because I remember the song I listened to right before I ran to kind of get the feeling, and then I put it away. It was that Brian Eno song, "Lay My Love."
Oh, interesting.
Because it had this kind of like
has a kind of propulsive.
Propulsive.
In a way, the only song I thought I wouldn't use is Modern Love because it had been used by Leos Carax in Mauvais Song and brilliantly. But it turns out it's the best song to run to in a movie. So, and I had I love that song, and it had a lot of meaning for me, and you love it. And so it was one of those, like, it became an homage we backed into. And then I would be asked about it as homage, and have to make up something, but you know, but I mean, it's you know, when I was a kid and I first heard Modern Love, it kind of blew my mind how good it sounded. You know, it was just like
those gated drums and
just a song I wanted to keep hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, and even the talking part at the beginning, like, I know when to go out, I know when to stay in and get things done.
Yeah.
It's great.
There's such a lived-in connection to all of your films together. We wish you the best, and thank you for coming and doing this Q&A.
Thanks for having us.
Noah Baumbach, Greta Gerwig.
Thank you.
Thank you.